A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Super Graphics, upon which we are going to discuss a few other things relating to some more recent titles. Now, while the next one that I have here is not exactly as recent as other titles recurring around the famous building blocks known as Legos, I will have to say a couple of things about Lego Brawls, because the idea of Lego minifigs, customizable as they are incredibly so, combined with fighting, seems like an epic idea. I mean, imagine if there were basically Mortal Kombat physics in Lego games. I mean, the idea of a one-on-one fighter with Lego characters actually seems like a unique concept for such a video game. But considering how recent this game is, how could it have fared if it had come out, let's say, 25 years prior, at a time when fighting games were actually common? But to be fair, it's a bit timely though, in contrast to what we had back then. I mean, we still have Mortal Kombat games, Street Fighter, and there was even a more recent Virtua Fighter title that came out just the same. Even Tekken had joined in on the act just as well, so there's certainly no shortage of one-on-one tournament fighter style games that seem to come around very often. I mean, we know that even Dragon Ball has had a bit of a history with the one-on-one fighter style gameplay, upon which the only main objective is to defeat the enemy in front of you, whom can usually be found on the right side of the screen while you're the player on the left of the screen. And that's typically how the format works, depending on what position you're in. Obviously, we know that a few unique things about fighter games is that the screen is usually locked and usually only moves specifically when a character is moving backwards or forwards, and sometimes if they're too far apart or too close to each other, then the camera angle can adjust to compensate for it. And another thing is that the D-pad is often used as the basis of control, such as using up to jump, left and right to move, and down to duck. Of course, you can do the same exact thing with the sticks, which can be a bit confusing. I'm normally used to operating with sticks, being that I've operated with more 3D type games over the years. So with fighter games, it's something that I usually have to get acquainted with. But granted, you can still use the stick to operate with the same controls as the D-pad if you wanted to. Then of course, we gotta get used to the fact that there's other things involved with fighting games. However, in the basis of Lego Brawls, it actually works very different from what we would have suspected could have been put together in this title. Instead, it actually gives you a bit more of a free-form control system. You actually have a jump button rather than it being on the D-pad, and you can also duck, punch, kick, jump over enemies, jump under enemies, slide underneath them. It basically gives us a more fluent and free-form motion, as opposed to the type of controls that are well known in the classic era of fighting games, or even when they're reintroduced into modern fighting games, mostly as an optional control setting, unless you want to try the newer controls that are often put in newer fighting games anyways. Lego Brawls, though, also doesn't really work as a one-on-one fighter style. Instead, it acts sort of like a Royal Rumble, if you will. I mean, it's not necessarily like WWE quality, but still, I'd say Lego Brawls actually does chalk up to a pretty unique level here. This is definitely one of those fighting games that's a bit beyond the normal wavelength that we would have anticipated, and at the same time, I'm also suspecting that perhaps they probably could have done something Mortal Kombat related, or even by the basis of more kid-friendly games like Dragon Ball, being that they've had their own experience with this one-on-one fighter style. But I will say that Lego Brawls, despite it being a bit different than what I initially pictured, it still works in a unique favor. And I will have to say that apart from it being a fighting game that acts more like a Royal Rumble rather than it being the typical one-on-one fighter, Lego Brawls still is a good candidate for fighting games. I will say that the progression system in this game does chalk up to a few levels here, and there's also a good variety of different characters that you can play as. Some characters of which are pre-packed into the game itself upon first playing it, And sometimes you can actually purchase them as DLCs from the PlayStation Store. There's also the occasion of unlocking characters, unlocking special abilities, unlocking different costumes and sets, and even the option to customize them in any way that you like. Like, you can put a Lego minifig together with a sombrero, a vest, and combat boots on, and you can even equip them with a saxophone. There's a good amount of different accessories, weapons, and other such feats that Lego minifigs can be equipped with, provided that you have your fights ready to roll. There's definitely a good amount of variety when it comes to customization of the character itself, so you could hardly ever get bored when it comes to that whole factor in this entire gameplay. But probably the one thing that I will have to say about this game that doesn't necessarily go too well is the monotony factor here. I mean, you are playing the exact same sort of thing. You're entering into a server with usually up to a dozen people at a time. You're brawling against the many Lego characters. You're occasionally punching and kicking, sometimes not registering any attacks, probably because of lack of connection or lag or something like that. And oftentimes, I find myself dead either from jumping off by accident or even getting hit without even seeing anything coming. Again, there's always the likelihood that there's either a bad connection or a lag that could take place in the server, thus allowing for some cheap shots to occur, usually in the favor of the other members of the party. But at the same time, though, it's something that we got to expect. Not all server equipment is considered up to date, and as such, who are we to question this sort of stuff? At the end of the day, it's a Lego game with fighting. A lot of it. I'm not sure that everybody would agree with the idea of having Lego-based tournament fighting take place, or Royal Rumbles akin to that of WWE or otherwise. But you know what? Lego Brawls still is a pretty good game for what it is. And I'm sure not many people would want to spend the sticker price tag that the game itself originally came with, which at the time was around 50 bucks. I'm sure that they could just lower it and that would probably be enough. Maybe, though, we actually could get a Lego 101 Tournament Fighter game. It could probably be even based off of an actual Lego property like Ninjago. Imagine Lego Ninjago 101 Tournament Fighter. That would be impressive, since that's technically what's happened over the years with the Ninjago series, even with the more recent Dragon's Rising continuity, which is impressive. I'll pretty much just give it that. But of course, we certainly can't forget to mention the fact that apart from everything I've already mentioned, the Lego Brawls game itself does, in fact, have one other issue. Apart from the monotony factor, the lack of connection or lags that can occasionally take place in your online matches, and of course the large sticker price it originally came with, not exactly being up to code. Considering that it's a bit monotonous, I wouldn't really want it to be placed at 50 bucks. But one complaint that some people have had, especially with Amazon, for instance, some reviews that people left behind was the fact that the inclusion of certain franchises, because after all, there was a lot of them that Lego has gotten involved with. You got Harry Potter, you got Jurassic World, you got Star Wars, and even Minecraft involved in all this stuff. Some people have complained about there not being much of that stuff in there. Of course, there is actually an unlockable where Jurassic World can be implemented into your collection, but that's usually in place of certain objectives. And that seems to downplay into one other thing that I feel like should be mentioned here. Sometimes you got to get your unlockables by completing very specific objectives. Like, you might need to take down a certain amount of players, or perform a specific combo on them, or basically ace certain time scores, or anything like that. There's always these objectives that sometimes are implemented in games that most people can find challenging. Some might not be willing to do them, and others might have a tough time trying. You know what, though? At the end of the day, I can't say I'm really here for that sort of stuff, but it is what it is, and I'll just simply leave it at the fact that perhaps us gamers can always find some enjoyability out of one game in particular. It could be anything in particular, but on my end, I could definitely roll with such titles like Astrobot, Ark Survival Evolved, the Resident Evil Remake series. Oh man. Now that I've mentioned that, there actually is something else that does come to mind. Maybe I'll touch a bit more on that tomorrow, but above all that, LEGO Brawls is an enjoyable title, and my overall scoring for this, a KFN official score, goes up to a good old 7.8 out of 10.1. Not exactly masterpiece quality, a few different flubs were put in, and if they were ironed out, then this certainly would be much higher on the list. Otherwise, it does a good job in terms of it being a fighting game, Royal Rumble style. Not much more to say, and not much to complain about here. So, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.